The question is, do we have the information through the media to arrive at those conclusions? And what about our policymakers? What do they depend on? Their diet from the media is as sparse as ours. And just to give a parallel example, if you recall American media reporting in the run-up to the American invasion of Iraq in 2003, in September of 2002, President Bush went to the UN, and he made the case for going to war. Saddam Hussein has violated all these elements of international law, and he's got those weapons, and he's in touch with terrorists, and and of course this was 1 year after September 11th. And in the 6 months leading up to the war, the American media were not very questioning or critical of this at all. Did not, of course they have to report what the president said, and his case, and his administration's case, but perspectives of those who were critical of this idea and the peace movement, that amorphous thing in this country and abroad, were given very, very low, almost in terms of peace demonstrations or anti-war demonstrations. A lot of the coverage was very derisive. So much so that in 2004, a year after we were at war in Iraq, and the mission was not accomplished, and things weren't going as well as the president and his advisors said they would, both the New York Times and the Washington Post, on the pages of their newspapers, came out and said, basically, nostra culpa. We didn't do a very good job of reporting this in the 6 months before. We didn't ask the critical questions. We didn't go to critical sources to balance what the administration was saying. But let me tell you why I think the problem is the way it is, and we'll say, if you really want to discuss what to do about it, you can ask me and I'm going to ask you. But I think there are 3 reasons why the reporting, as I've described it, on this conflict is the way it is. Reason number 1, and by the way, this is not unique to reporting on this particular conflict, is that the reporting adheres very closely to the U.S. policy line. It doesn't matter if we have a Republican president or a Democratic president, a Republican-controlled Congress or a democratically controlled Congress. It's an over-reliance on official sources, people who are in government or were in government, who again have important and valid points of view that have to be conveyed, but to the virtual exclusion of all other sources. So what we basically get is reporting that doesn't analyze or challenge this policy because nobody else gets to talk about it. That basically doesn't happen. Second reason why I think the reporting is the way it is after, and I'm giving you these in what I think are, according to my own analysis, descending order of importance. The top one is reporting hews way too closely to U.S. policy. Doesn't examine it, doesn't analyze it, doesn't challenge it. Doesn't go outside the realm, very often, of official sources. Number 2, for this book, I conducted taped personal one-on-one interviews. I actually got to function a little bit like a journalist instead of, in addition to a thumb-sucking academic. And I interviewed 14 American journalists who had reported this conflict. Not at the time, they weren't reporting it, they weren't based in Jerusalem at the time I interviewed them, but at some previous point. And these folks had worked for major American media outlets such as the New York Times, the Chicago Tribune, ABC News, Time Newsweek, etc. And I talked to them about their work process. When you get over there, how do you access Israeli and Palestinian sources? How do you process Israeli and Palestinian spin? Because both sides are very good at spinning their own versions of the story. And one phrase kept popping up when they were describing their work process. And they said, you get over there, and this story is a reporter's dream. Sometimes they do take a lot of flack from people at home who are dissatisfied with the coverage, but in a sense, it's an easy story to cover in that you can get to it, it comes to you, it's familiar, and I think this is another reason that discourages a deeper analytical look at some of these underlying important contextual reasons. And reason number 3, and then I will stop talking, at least for a while, is And I'm sure this is known and familiar, and it's already been mentioned by at least two people at the very beginning of the evening, that especially in periods of prolonged and intense violence between the two sides, but sometimes even when things are not especially violent over there, there are constituent groups in the United States, both pro-Israel and pro-Palestinian, who, when they are to see something they don't like, and it's one thing to say, okay, you got it factually wrong. You made a mistake. It didn't happen in this year, it happened in that year. But we're talking about people dissatisfied with images, people dissatisfied with narratives. They complain, and they complain vociferously. Both sides do it, they don't do it in equal dimension. Generally speaking, and I wrote a whole chapter on this in the book, the pro-Israel side is much better organized, has many more financial resources at its control, under its control to approach, to stage boycotts, to stage letter writing campaigns, email campaigns. There's an organization in Boston that is a pro-Israel media monitor that has an annual budget based on contributions of about $2 million a year. That's a lot of money to do this work. Gradually, over the last 10 or 15 years, we have seen the emergence of pro-Palestinian media watchdog groups, but they're not nearly as well organized or well funded. How many dead children is too many is a question often asked by Palestinians and Israelis, but it shows no hint of being resolved, end quote. And then my comment here is, beyond pathos and poetics, the true work of reporting the conflict remains to be carried out by asking and investigating the difficult question, why is this so? To understand why there is no hint of resolution in sight requires getting beyond vivid and artfully crafted word pictures based on empirical observation and superficial balancing of adversarial perspectives. He said, she said. Palestinians say, Israelis say. To accomplish this, to answer that question through this kind of investigation, through this kind of reporting over time, would be to realize what American journalism has for so long aspired and claimed to be, as well as to fulfill the promise of what it can indeed still do. Contribute truths, that's with an S on the end, clarity and hope toward the resolution of a conflict that in its continuum of tragedy has all but ceased to produce news, despite the illusion of it.